NOS4A22, Chapter 5, The Order of the Leach. Leach, a leader of the oldest vampiric strong creatives. He had been crucified by Roman soldiers over 2,000 years ago. During his time of dying, he concentrated on escaping to his version of paradise. It worked. After building his own realm, he would return to the world after 400 years, and every 400 years after. Since the time he escaped, Leach has returned 5 times, taking a new leech every 400 years, including himself. There are now 6 leeches. Since their existence, the first of these monstrously natured escapists of fate had not only found a way to continuously cheat death throughout centuries across 2 millennia. The original leech learned how to exploit life and death for all it's worth doubly. The originator of dually vampiric attacks, both physically and psychically, made himself an alternative god. After his supposed execution during his time away, all who knew of Leach thought him to have been killed. Leach obviously didn't go by the suggestive nickname at first. He was simply a fading memory, same as his old life. He lived the humble life of a farmer who took in the persecuted, giving them shelter in his new place within his new dream world that he created. He became the landlord of the people who sought refuge as sojourners, as he once was that man who sought refuge. He could present himself as a nice man like how he once was. Now it was he who had the power to take in tenants, and in Aram's tortured mind, he would not do as his landlords did to him. The workers died under their old selfish commands after living a life of suffering before him. No matter all the good Aram tried to do, he just kept taking back things he did like any kind of nice thing. Aram hated hearing his name so much one day, he yelled at one of the peaceful crowds to stop saying his name. The bitterness took over, and everyone he helped take care of saw the change as it was drastic almost as soon as Aram had everyone settled and comfortable. The damage had been done, and no matter how much he tried, there was no going back, and no going forward. Aram was now and forever changed, stuck in a time and state of being that proves to be a result of suppressed damage that goes unpaid until death. What happens, you may ask, with God's little science experiment? No life, no death, not for the leech. He will feed life to death, though. That's all he does now. Feeding life to death, cause and effect. This was what Aram had to do that day about 2,000 years ago at the edge of Rome. Aram was hanging on a cross that day, the day his trial ended, and it was over just as quickly as it had started. To say Aram had a trial is a gross and absurd statement of formal technicality. He was sentenced to death by crucifixion by the families who formed a mob against him. Each mother and wife accused Aram of plotting to overthrow the local government with the radical religious sect he was harboring. They knew in their hearts this wasn't true, but those hearts were broken and made bitter by the man who worked with their husbands and sons, and yet didn't die like the rest. They knew one way or another something was wrong. Aram worked on that farm as a paid worker who had an agreement with the landlord that he would be left alone from everyone, both the landlord himself and the other tenants included in the stipulative deal beforehand. He would do the night harvesting as the others would take care of the day. Aram's secret was the additional crew of people he was bringing in at night to take care of. When they were recognized as the religious sect that was being persecuted after being spotted, Aram had felt betrayed because these new people he took in had never mentioned this very important fact to him. Aram was growing increasingly bothered by the people who were trying to include him in their prayers and strange foreign religious practices which seemed like pointless rituals to him. He kept these things to himself and stayed to himself, as this was all he knew to be his character. In his life before his trial, Aram was never having any kind of life experiences other than work and daydreaming. After convincing himself his dream was never going to happen, he learned that dreams pay off. Once he began focusing on the same thoughts he always was choosing to think of instead of the reality he rejected. Aram had nothing to do with the things that the old landlords did to those slaughtered religious people in hiding, other than one little thing. One tiny word that carries more weight than what you might think if unaware. No. Thinking of the same thing that makes Leach mad to this day is the established fact with no answer. Why? He answered them no when asked if he knew who they were, if he knew they were hiding, and if he was one of them. He just said no. Aram was the leech, but he was also another thing. He was the lone man. No one was ever next to him. Not close, not ever. He was a man whose destroyed lifetime fueled his new existence. The reflection in the mirror of acceptable self-perception had been long gone. The gateway had since been opened. After his first 400 years on his journey alone, the leech was free, and he had now developed his impossible identity as an entirely new creature of strength as compared to the weakling he thought of himself to be within his demented and completely warped mind. This was a thing of the past now, he thought. Aram would never be spoke of again without meeting death, because the leech was all that remained from the one who escaped death from the hopeless execution. The leech had a new agenda, and that was because he was born again after Aram escaped death. So, with his old self never dying in his mind, haunting him, the leech uses this source of rage to possess the strongest evil cosmic power of all the energies of the heavens. Rest on that peace, he thought. He thought and he thought on that thought. Rest on that peace. Rest on that peace. Aram was a man that evolved into something else that did not want to honor the man with no honor he felt he was, even though it was completely wrong in his mind, as he made things twisted and backwards. The leech would think the same way, year after year. When someone thinks the same way for hundreds of years, developing their brain into an organism that has such power, it can reanimate itself through a regenerative recycling process in sectional patterns, one after the other in sections throughout the leech's weaponized brain. This was the source of his power, and he knew very well the extent of it all. His mind was what allowed him to transcend into the next level of hyperreal existence. There were quick steps being taken within the leech's mind, which were bringing him to a strange, unconventional spot that is unparalleled in history, and he knew it, like some other valuable information he obtained about himself through his self-discovery. There were dangers he was avoiding that created a much more dangerous threat to not only himself and any kind of good redeeming quality, trait, act, or deed, for that matter. This was affecting the balance of reality in all the earth. The balance of reality is something not to be taken lightly, yet we all take it for granted. Without the balance of all reality throughout the world, then all continents would be corrupted and penetrated by crossovers of entrances and exits, with passageways, tunnels in every direction, all over the place, in such ways we cannot even begin to make any sense of it all. To get you to understand what kind of threat to the world the leech creates, here's an idea. When you wake up one day, there might not be the comfortable familiarities you take for granted when you open your eyes. Because of a potential disturbance in the order of normalcies, the sinisterly strange changes occurred.